The letter arrived on the bleakest day of Quentin Hadley's life. The same day they lowered Elizabeth into the hard Wyoming earth, leaving him alone with two wailing infants who would never know their mother. Green River, Wyoming, 1878, a place built on cattle, determination, and the sort of hope that died as quick as it came. Much like Elizabeth had Quentin stood at the window of his ranch house, watching the first light creep across the eastern pasture, his eyes burning from lack of sleep. Behind him, in makeshift cradles, his 2-month-old twins finally slumbered after crying through the night, a boy and a girl, Samuel and Sarah. Elizabeth had chosen the names during her pregnancy, before the fever had claimed her 3 days after their birth. The crumpled letter on the table held his gaze. His sister's careful handwriting promised a solution: a young woman named Madeline Vaughn, newly arrived from Boston, seeking work and lodging in the West. 24 years old, educated, experienced with children, and most importantly, available immediately. His sister had written that Miss Vaughn was on her way by stagecoach, set to arrive in Green River that very afternoon. Quentin ran a calloused hand through his sandy hair, a knot forming in his stomach. He didn't want a stranger in his home, didn't want anyone taking Elizabeth's place. But the crying of his children had worn him raw. His cattle needed tending, the ranch hands needed direction, and he couldn't remember the last time he'd slept more than 2 hours together. "You look like hell warmed over," came a gruff voice from the doorway. Quentin didn't bother to turn. "Morning to you too, Frank." Frank Peterson, his foreman for the last 6 years, stepped into the kitchen and poured himself coffee from the pot Quentin had brewed at dawn. "Twins sleeping?" "For now." Frank nodded, leaning against the counter. At 53, he had seen enough of life to know when a man was drowning. "Your sister's idea about hiring help is the right one." "I know," Quentin admitted, "but it feels like giving up on Elizabeth." Frank shook his head. "She'd want those babies taken care of proper, and she'd want you to keep on living, not just surviving." The twins began to stir, soft, whimpering sounds that would soon escalate to full-throated cries. Quentin felt his shoulders tense, his body preparing for another round of helplessness. "I'll fetch Mrs. Wilson from next door to help for the morning," Frank offered. "You need to clean yourself up before this Boston lady arrives. First impressions and all." Quentin nodded, too tired to argue. As Frank departed, he crossed to the cradles and gazed down at his children. They had Elizabeth's nose and his stubborn chin, a perfect blend of them both. He touched each tiny face with a gentle finger. "We'll be all right," he whispered, not quite believing it himself. By midday, Quentin had bathed, shaved, and donned fresh clothes. The house, while not spotless, had been tidied by Mrs. Wilson, who now sat rocking Sarah while Samuel slept. Quentin stood on the porch, watching the road that led to town, his stomach churning with uncertainty. The sound of hoofbeats made him straighten. A horse-drawn wagon appeared, driven by the town's storekeeper, Harold Jenkins. Beside him sat a woman in a modest blue traveling dress, her face partially hidden by the brim of her bonnet. As the wagon pulled up to the house, Quentin descended the porch steps, hat in hand. Harold reined the horses to a stop. "Afternoon, Quentin," Harold called. "Got your visitor here safe and sound from the stagecoach station." The woman turned, and Quentin found himself looking into eyes the color of summer sage. Her face was heart-shaped, framed by chestnut hair tucked neatly under her bonnet. She wasn't beautiful in the conventional sense. Her nose was slightly too long, her mouth a bit too wide, but there was a quiet strength in her features that caught him off guard. "Mr. Hadley?" she asked, her voice cultured but warm. "I'm Madeline Vaughn." Quentin nodded, finding his voice. "Miss Vaughn, welcome to Green River." Harold helped her down from the wagon, then unloaded her trunk, a modest size that spoke of limited possessions. After exchanging pleasantries, Harold departed, leaving Quentin and Madeline standing in awkward silence. "I was sorry to hear about your wife," Madeline said softly. "Your sister Clara told me of your situation. I want you to know I'm here to help in any way I can." "Thank you," Quentin replied stiffly. The twins are inside. I should warn you, they've been difficult." A smile touched Madeline's lips. "Most babies are, Mr. Hadley, especially when they sense distress around them." Something in her tone, not judgmental but understanding, made Quentin relax slightly. He gestured toward the house. "Please come in, Mrs. Wilson from the neighboring ranch has been helping today." Inside, Mrs. Wilson looked up with undisguised relief. "Thank heavens you're here, dear. These little ones have been testing my old arms." Madeline removed her bonnet and gloves, setting them aside before approaching the cradles. Without hesitation, she bent to examine the twins, her expression soft. "They're beautiful children, Mr. Hadley." "Elizabeth's doing," he said, the words coming out more harshly than intended. If Madeline noticed his tone, she gave no indication. "May I?" she asked Mrs. Wilson, gesturing to Sarah. The older woman gladly transferred the baby to Madeline's arms. To Quentin's surprise, Sarah, who had been fussing, quieted almost immediately. "You have a touch," Mrs. Wilson observed. Madeline smiled, swaying gently with the infant. "I helped raise my younger siblings after my mother passed, 5 of them, including a set of twins." "Well, I'll be on my way then," Mrs. Wilson announced, gathering her shawl. "My arthritis is telling me it's going to rain tonight, and I've got bread to bake before it does." After Mrs. Wilson's departure, Quentin showed Madeline to the small bedroom that had been hastily prepared for her. It was adjacent to the nursery, which had once been Elizabeth's sewing room. "It's not much," he apologized, suddenly seeing the room through her eyes, the plain furniture, the faded curtains, the undeniable air of a house lacking a woman's touch. "It's perfect," Madeline replied, setting her bonnet on the bed. "Mr. Hadley, I understand this is difficult for you. Having a stranger in your home at such a time. I promise to be as unobtrusive as possible while caring for your children." Quentin studied her, this woman who had traveled so far to help a family she'd never met. "Why did you come west, Miss Vaughn? Boston seems a far cry from Wyoming territory." A shadow passed over her face. "I needed a fresh start, and I've always believed that helping others is the surest way to find purpose." She hesitated, then added, "Your sister's letter mentioned that you have a working ranch." "I should tell you that while I know little about ranching, I'm a quick learner and willing to help beyond childcare if needed." Before Quentin could respond, Samuel began to cry from the nursery. Madeline excused herself and moved swiftly to attend to him. Quentin watched from the doorway as she lifted his son with practiced ease, checking his diaper before cradling him against her shoulder. "There now," she murmured, patting Samuel's back. "What's troubling you, little one?" The baby's cries subsided to whimpers, then ceased altogether. Quentin felt an unexpected twinge in his chest, gratitude mingled with a deeper ache. This should have been Elizabeth, singing softly to their children, knowing instinctively what they needed. "I should check on the men," he said abruptly. "They're moving cattle to the north pasture today." Madeline nodded, not looking up from Samuel. "We'll be fine, Mr. Hadley. Take whatever time you need." Quentin left the house, gulping the fresh air like a drowning man. The ranch spread before him, 160 acres of hard-won land that had been his dream and Elizabeth's. Now it felt like an anchor around his neck, weighing him down with responsibilities he wasn't sure he could shoulder alone. Frank spotted him from the corral and waved him over. "The Boston lady arrive?" "Yes," Quentin replied, leaning against the fence. "She seems capable, pretty." Quentin frowned. "She's here to care for my children, Frank, not to be assessed for her appearance." Frank raised his eyebrows. "Just making conversation. No need to bite my head off." Quentin sighed, regretting his sharpness. "She seems kind, good with the twins already." "Then count your blessings. Those babies need a woman's touch, and you need sleep before you fall face first into a cow patty." Despite himself, Quentin laughed his first real laugh since Elizabeth's passing. It felt strange, almost disloyal, but also like the release of pressure from a valve wound too tight. When he returned to the house at dusk, he found the main room tidied, the smell of cooking food filling the air. Madeline stood at the stove, stirring something in a pot while humming softly. The twins were asleep in their cradles nearby. "You didn't need to cook," Quentin said, hanging his hat on the rack by the door. Madeline turned, offering a small smile. "I wanted to be useful. It's just a simple stew, but I thought you might be hungry after working all day." He was, in fact, starving. He couldn't remember the last proper meal he'd eaten. "Thank you." They ate in relative silence, broken only by Madeline's occasional question about the ranch or the town. Quentin found himself answering more fully than he'd intended, something about her quiet attentiveness drawing words from him. "Your sister mentioned you've been ranching here for 5 years, she asked. Quentin nodded. "Came west from Pennsylvania in '73. Started with 30 head of cattle and this house, which was half its current size. Elizabeth and I built it up together. She must have been remarkable." "She was." Quentin set down his spoon. "Miss Vaughn, I appreciate what you're doing for my children. But I need to be clear you're here as their caretaker, not as a replacement for their mother." Madeline's eyes widened slightly. "I would never presume such a thing, Mr. Hadley. Your children will know their mother through the stories you tell them and the love you give them. I'm simply here to help shoulder the practical burdens while you grieve." Her directness startled him. Most women he knew would have retreated into hurt silence at his blunt words. "I apologize if I seemed harsh." "No apology needed. Grief makes its own rules, Mr. Hadley. I lost my father when I was 16, not the same as losing a spouse, but I understand something of the rawness." That night, when the twins woke crying at midnight, Quentin rose automatically, bracing himself for the hours of walking and rocking ahead. But as he stumbled into the hallway, he met Madeline, already moving toward the nursery in her robe. "I've got them," she said softly. "You need rest." "But Mr. Hadley, you can't care for your children if you're falling down from exhaustion. Let me do what you've hired me to do." Too tired to argue, he nodded and retreated to his bedroom. For the first time in 2 months, Quentin slept through the night, waking at dawn with momentary disorientation at the silence in the house. He found Madeline in the kitchen, the twins fed and content in their cradles. She had dark circles under her eyes but smiled when she saw him. "You look better," she observed, pouring him coffee. "And you look tired," he replied. "I'm sorry, I should have helped with them." Madeline shook her head. "We made a bargain, Mr. Hadley. You run your ranch, I care for your children, though I will say these two seem to have opposite schedules. When one sleeps, the other wakes." "They've been that way since birth," Quentin said, a bittersweet memory surfacing. "Elizabeth used to joke that they were conspiring against us." For a moment, they shared a look of understanding. Then Samuel began to fuss, and the moment passed as Madeline moved to attend to him. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, imperceptibly, a routine emerged. Quentin found himself sleeping better, eating regularly, and gradually emerging from the fog of grief that had enveloped him. The ranch, which had begun to suffer from his neglect, was running smoothly again as he returned his attention to the cattle and the land. Madeline proved to be more than just good with the twins. She brought order to the household, cooking meals that reminded Quentin of Elizabeth's home cooking, mending clothes that had been piling up, and even planting a small kitchen garden beside the house. One evening in late June, as summer settled firmly over Wyoming, Quentin returned from town to find Madeline sitting on the porch, the twins asleep in a shared cradle beside her. She was reading, her face softened in the golden light of sunset. "Good book?" he asked, climbing the steps. She looked up, marking her place with a finger. "Letters from my sister in Boston, not quite a book, but news from home is always welcome." Quentin sat in the chair beside her, stretching out his legs. "Do you miss it?" "Boston," Madeline considered the question. "I miss my family." "But Boston itself?" "No, not particularly. It was becoming too confining." "Confining? I would have thought Wyoming would feel more restricting than a big eastern city." She laughed softly. "There are different kinds of confinement, Mr. Hadley. In Boston, I was defined by my family's reduced circumstances after my father's death. Here, I'm defined by what I choose to do each day." Quentin studied her profile, struck by her insight. Elizabeth felt the same way. She was the daughter of a banker in Philadelphia, expected to make a suitable marriage and host tea parties for the rest of her life. She said coming west was like finally being able to breathe. "She sounds braver than I am. I came west because I was running from something." She came because she was running toward something. The honesty in her voice made Quentin curious. "What were you running from, if you don't mind my asking?" Madeline hesitated, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "A mistake. I became engaged to a man I believed I loved, only to discover he was not who he presented himself to be. Breaking the engagement caused quite the scandal." "I'm sorry," Quentin said, surprised by the protective anger that rose in him at the thought of someone hurting her. "Don't be." "It was the best mistake I ever made," she smiled wryly. "Without it, I might never have found the courage to leave Boston, and I wouldn't be here now." The twins stirred, and Madeline leaned forward to rock the cradle gently with one hand. The simple, maternal gesture struck Quentin deeply. In the 2 months since her arrival, Madeline had become essential to his household, to his children, and he realized with a start, to him as well. The thought disturbed him enough that he made an excuse to check on the horses, needing distance from the woman who was beginning to occupy too many of his thoughts. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Quentin was checking fence lines with 2 of his ranch hands when he spotted a wagon approaching from town. As it drew closer, he recognized his sister Clara and her husband James. "Surprise," Clara called as the wagon pulled up beside him. At 36, she was Quentin's elder by 4 years, her face showing the fine lines of a woman who smiled often. "We decided it was high time we met these niece and nephew of ours properly." Quentin grinned despite his surprise, dismounting to help Clara down from the wagon. "You might have written ahead. And give you time to tell us not to come. I know you too well, little brother." Clara embraced him tightly. "How are you, really?" "Better," he admitted. "Having Miss Vaughn here has made all the difference." Clara's eyes sparkled with interest. "Has it now? And how are you finding Madeline? I only met her briefly in town before sending her your way." "She's excellent with the children," Quentin replied carefully, recognizing the matchmaking gleam in his sister's eye. "Professional and capable." Clara murmured, clearly unconvinced by his neutral tone. "Well, I'm looking forward to seeing how she's settling in." At the house, they found Madeline in the garden, a wide-brimmed hat protecting her from the sun as she pulled weeds. The twins were nearby in their shared cradle, shaded by a canopy she had rigged from an old sheet. "You must be Clara," Madeline said warmly, rising to greet them. "Mr. Hadley speaks of you often." "All terrible things, I'm sure," Clara replied with a laugh, embracing Madeline as though they were old friends rather than near strangers. "And please call me Clara. Mr. Hadley and Miss Vaughn sound so formal for people sharing a home." Madeline's cheeks colored slightly. "Force of habit from my upbringing, I suppose." "Well, we'll break you of that stuffy Boston formality soon enough," Clara declared. "Now, show me these beautiful babies I've come to spoil." Over the next few days, Clara's presence brought a lightness to the household that had been missing. She doted on the twins, shared stories of Quentin's childhood that made Madeline laugh, and cooked elaborate meals that reminded Quentin of their mother's Sunday dinners. In the evenings, the 4 adults would sit on the porch, talking as the sun set and the first stars appeared. Quentin found himself watching Madeline during these conversations, noticing how her face animated when discussing books or ideas, how her laugh had a slight musical quality, how her hands moved expressively as she spoke. On their 3rd night after James had retired and Madeline had gone to check on the twins, Clara cornered Quentin in the kitchen. "You're falling for her," she stated without preamble. Quentin nearly dropped the glass he was holding. "Don't be ridiculous." "It's not ridiculous, Quentin. It's natural. She's a lovely young woman who's caring for your children and bringing light back into your home." "Elizabeth's been gone barely 4 months," he said, his voice low and tight. Clara's expression softened. "I'm not suggesting you've forgotten Elizabeth or stopped loving her. But life continues, brother. Elizabeth would want— Don't tell me what Elizabeth would want, Quentin interrupted, more sharply than intended. I'm sorry, but I can't think about this right now, Clara sighed, reaching out to touch his arm. All right. But don't shut yourself off from the possibility of happiness because you think it dishonors Elizabeth's memory. That would be the real betrayal. Later that night, unable to sleep, Quentin stood at the window of his bedroom, staring out at the moonlit pasture. Clara's words echoed in his mind, stirring up emotions he wasn't ready to examine. A sound from the nursery drew his attention. Moving quietly down the hallway, he paused at the nursery door, finding Madeline rocking Sarah, who had apparently woken. In the dim light of a single candle, Madeline was singing softly a lullaby he recognized as one his own mother had sung. The scene before him, Madeline with his child, in the home he had built with Elizabeth, created a confusing tangle of emotions. Guilt, longing, grief, and something else he wasn't ready to name. He must have made a sound, for Madeline looked up, her eyes meeting his across the room. "Mr. Hadley," she whispered, "I'm sorry if we woke you." "You didn't," he assured her, entering the room fully. "May I?" She nodded, carefully transferring Sarah to his arms. The baby whimpered briefly, then settled against his chest, her tiny hand curling around one of his fingers. "She's growing so fast," Madeline observed. "Both of them are. Samuel tried to roll over today." Quentin looked down at his daughter's face, seeing Elizabeth in the curve of her cheek, the shape of her eyes. "I'm afraid I'm missing too much, being out on the ranch all day." "You're doing what you must to provide for them," Madeline said gently, "and they know you love them." Children sense these things. How can they know about love when they've lost their mother so young? Madeline was quiet for a moment. "My mother died when I was 8. I still knew she loved me, through my memories and through my father's stories about her." Your children will know Elizabeth the same way through you, through Clara, through the life you built that they're growing up in. Quentin swallowed hard, nodding. "Thank you," he said simply. Sarah had drifted back to sleep, and he placed her carefully in her cradle. As he straightened, he found Madeline watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Good night, Mr. Hadley," she said softly. "Quentin," he corrected, surprising himself. "I think Clara's right, we're past the need for such formality." A smile touched her lips. "Good night, Quentin." "Good night, Madeline." The days following Clara and James's departure settled into a new rhythm, one marked by a subtle shift in the relationship between Quentin and Madeline. The formality that had defined their early interactions gave way to a more comfortable familiarity. July brought scorching heat to Wyoming, making ranch work particularly grueling. One afternoon, Quentin returned to the house earlier than usual, driven in by temperatures that had the cattle seeking shade and refusing to move. He found Madeline in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, hair pinned haphazardly atop her head as she kneaded bread dough. The twins were napping in their cradles nearby, a small window cracked to allow a faint breeze. "This heat is ungodly," Quentin announced. Pouring himself water from the pitcher Madeline kept cool in a shaded corner. She looked up, brushing flour from her cheek with the back of her wrist. "It reminds me of the summer I spent with my aunt in Virginia. We thought we might melt right into the floorboards." Quentin smiled, noticing the way perspiration had dampened tendrils of hair at her temples and neck. "You're making bread in this heat. We need to eat, heat or no heat." She punched down the dough with perhaps more force than necessary. "Though I'll admit, standing over a hot stove later will be less than pleasant." "Let me help," Quentin offered, rolling up his own sleeves. Madeline looked surprised. "You know how to bake bread?" "I know how to follow instructions," he countered. "And 4 hands will finish the work faster than 2. She hesitated, then nodded, making space for him at the table. "Wash your hands thoroughly first." Under her direction, Quentin shaped loaves while Madeline prepared a simple stew that could simmer without much attention. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, broken occasionally by her instructions or his questions. "You're a natural," she commented as he deftly shaped his 3rd loaf. Most men I know wouldn't know what to do with bread dough if their lives depended on it. Elizabeth insisted we both know how to do essential tasks, Quentin explained. She could mend fences and birth calves, I can cook basic meals and tend to laundry if needed. She said it made us true partners. Madeline's expression softened. She was a wise woman. She was, Quentin agreed, finding that the ache that usually accompanied memories of Elizabeth was still present but less sharp. What about you? Any skills that might surprise me? Madeline laughed, a sound that had become increasingly frequent in the house. I can shoot a pistol with reasonable accuracy. My father insisted all his daughters learn, saying a woman should be able to defend herself. Another wise parent, Quentin remarked, though I hope you never need to use that particular skill in Green River. As do I, but it's comforting to know I could if necessary. She glanced at him sideways. Does it bother you, a woman knowing how to handle firearms? Not at all. Elizabeth carried a revolver whenever she rode out alone, saved her from a rattlesnake once. They finished preparing the food just as the twins began to wake. Quentin took Samuel while Madeline attended to Sarah, each of them settling into rocking chairs on the porch where the air was marginally cooler. I've been thinking, Quentin said after a while, the twins are nearly 5 months old now. They'll be crawling before we know it, and this house isn't exactly suited for curious babies. Madeline nodded, gently bouncing Sarah on her knee. I've had the same thought. The fireplace especially concerns me and the stairs to the root cellar. I was planning to build a fence around the fireplace this weekend, and a gate for the cellar stairs. That's an excellent idea. I could help if you'd like. I'm quite handy with a hammer. Quentin smiled. Another surprising skill. Growing up with 5 younger siblings, I learned to fix what was broken rather than wait for someone else to do it. The weekend brought slightly cooler temperatures and the promised carpentry project. True to her word, Madeline proved adept with tools, helping Quentin measure, cut, and assemble the safety barriers. As they worked, Quentin found himself increasingly aware of her presence, the scent of lavender that clung to her hair, the graceful efficiency of her movements, the way her face lit up when she laughed at his dry jokes. By Sunday afternoon, they had completed the safety measures and celebrated with a picnic under the large cottonwood tree behind the house. The twins lay on a blanket between them, batting at the wooden toys Quentin had carved during the long evenings of his early grief. I received a letter yesterday, Madeline said as they finished the apple tarts she had baked that morning, from my sister in Boston. Something in her tone made Quentin look up sharply. Is everything all right? Yes, but she's getting married in September. She's asked me to return for the wedding. Quentin felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. I see, and will you go? Madeline hesitated, her fingers pleating the edge of the blanket. I should. Louisa is my youngest sister and we've always been close, but she met his eyes directly. I'm concerned about leaving you and the twins. It would be for at least a month, possibly longer with travel time. Relief mingled with concern in Quentin's chest. He had feared she might be announcing a permanent departure. We would manage, he said, though the prospect of returning to life without her help, without her presence, was daunting. When would you need to leave? Mid-August, ideally. That would give me time to reach Boston before the preparations become too hectic. She paused. If you prefer I not go, I would understand. My commitment is to you, to the twins. Quentin shook his head. I wouldn't ask you to miss your sister's wedding. Family is important. Thank you, she said softly. I'll write to inquire about stagecoach schedules tomorrow. That night, after the twins were asleep and Madeline had retired to her room, Quentin sat alone in the main room, nursing a small glass of whiskey. The thought of Madeline returning to Boston, even temporarily, disturbed him more than he wanted to admit. What if she decided to stay there? What if the comforts of city life, the proximity to her family, convinced her that Wyoming was too harsh, too isolated? What if she met someone there, someone who could offer her more than a widower with 2 small children and a hardscrabble ranch? The questions circled in his mind like wolves around a campfire, keeping sleep at bay long into the night. The following weeks passed with an undercurrent of tension. Neither Quentin nor Madeline mentioned her impending trip often, but it hung between them like an approaching storm. Quentin found himself watching her with the twins, memorizing the way she soothed them, the songs she sang, the routines she had established. One evening in early August, as they sat on the porch after dinner, Madeline broke the silence that had settled between them. "I've been thinking about the twins while I'm gone," she said. "Mrs. Wilson has offered to come by daily to help, and I've written detailed instructions for their care." Quentin nodded, staring out at the darkening pasture. "We'll be fine." "I know you will," she hesitated. "Quentin, is something troubling you? You've seemed distant these past weeks." He considered deflecting, then decided on honesty. "I'm concerned you might not come back." The words hung in the warm evening air. Madeline's intake of breath was audible in the silence that followed. "What makes you think I wouldn't return?" she asked finally. Quentin turned to face her, finding her eyes wide and questioning in the fading light. "Boston is your home, your family is there, and Green River is. Well, it's not exactly the center of culture and opportunity." "Is that what you think I want? Culture and opportunity?" "I don't know what you want," Quentin admitted. "We've never really discussed your future plans." Madeline was quiet for a long moment, her hands folded in her lap. "When I came west, I wasn't certain what I was looking for. A fresh start, yes, but beyond that, I had no clear vision. But these months here with you and the twins," she stopped, seeming to choose her words carefully. "I've found something I didn't expect." "What's that?" Quentin asked, his heart beating faster despite his efforts to remain calm. "Purpose, belonging." She met his eyes directly. "I will return from Boston, Quentin, I promise you that." Relief washed through him, followed quickly by a deeper emotion he wasn't ready to name. "I'm glad to hear it," he said simply. "The twins would miss you terribly." "Only the twins?" she asked softly. The question hung between them, fraught with meaning. Quentin swallowed hard, gathering his courage. "No," he admitted finally. "Not only the twins." Madeline's smile in response was like the first light of dawn breaking over the mountains. 2 days before Madeline's scheduled departure, disaster struck. Quentin was working with the cattle in the north pasture when Frank came galloping toward him, waving urgently. "Fire!" Frank shouted as he drew near. Lightning struck the Jenkins place, winds pushing it this way fast. Quentin's blood ran cold. Wildfires were the nightmare of every rancher capable of destroying in hours what had taken years to build. "Alert the men. Get everyone we can to dig fire breaks along the eastern boundary." As Frank rode off to gather the ranch hands, Quentin spurred his horse toward home, fear clawing at his throat. The house was directly in the fire's path if it jumped the creek that separated his land from the Jenkins property. He found Madeline already in action, filling buckets with water and soaking blankets. "I saw the smoke," she explained, her face tight with concern. "The twins are ready to go. I've packed their essentials." "Good, take them to town immediately. The hotel should be safe." She shook her head firmly. "I'm not leaving you to face this alone. Mrs. Wilson is on her way. She can take the twins to town while we prepare the house." "Madeline, please, this isn't a discussion, Quentin," she interrupted, her voice steady. "I can help and you need every hand available." Before he could argue further, Mrs. Wilson's wagon appeared on the road. Within minutes, the twins were safely on their way to town, and Quentin and Madeline turned their full attention to protecting the ranch. The fire moved faster than anticipated, driven by a hot easterly wind. Quentin's men worked frantically to create fire breaks, but the flames jumped the creek in multiple places, igniting the dry grass of the eastern pasture. By mid-afternoon, the fire had reached the edge of the ranch yard. Quentin, Madeline, and 3 ranch hands formed a desperate bucket brigade, dousing the roof and walls of the house while flames devoured the grass mere yards away. "The barn!" Frank shouted over the roar of the fire. "It's catching!" Quentin turned to see sparks landing on the barn roof, small flames beginning to take hold. The structure housed not only his horses and equipment, but the winter feed for his cattle. Losing it would be catastrophic. Without hesitation, he raced toward the burning building, Madeline keeping pace beside him despite his shout for her to stay back. Inside, the horses were panicking, kicking at their stalls as smoke filled the air. "Get them out," Quentin ordered, moving to open the first stall. "I'll try to reach the roof hatch and pour water down." Madeline nodded, coughing as she began releasing horses. Quentin climbed the ladder to the hayloft, where a trapdoor led to the roof. Pushing it open, he found the flames more advanced than he'd feared, eating rapidly through the dry wooden shingles. The bucket of water he'd carried up made little difference. As he turned to descend, a burning beam crashed down, blocking his path. Heat seared his lungs as smoke billowed around him. "Quentin," Madeline's voice called from below. "Where are you?" "The ladder's blocked," he shouted back, dropping to his knees to find clearer air. "Get out now." Instead of the sound of retreating footsteps, he heard Madeline's voice again, closer this time. "There's another way, the side window to the hayloft." Through the thickening smoke, he crawled toward the small window she'd mentioned. Outside, he could see Madeline scaling the outside wall, using the rough boards as handholds. "Are you crazy?" he called as her face appeared in the opening. "Get down from there, give me your hand," she demanded, reaching toward him. The window was too small for him to fit through easily, but as the fire spread behind him, he had no choice. With Madeline's help, he squeezed through the opening, tumbling onto the sloped roof below. Together they slid to the edge and dropped the short distance to the ground. They had barely cleared the barn when the roof collapsed with a thunderous crash, sending a plume of sparks into the darkening sky. For hours, they fought alongside the ranch hands and neighbors who had come to help. By nightfall, the wind had mercifully shifted, pushing the main body of the fire away from the ranch buildings. The house and corrals had been saved, though the barn was a total loss, and nearly a quarter of Quentin's grazing land had been consumed. Exhausted, smoke-stained, and singed in places, Quentin and Madeline sat on the porch steps as the last glow of the retreating fire colored the horizon. "You saved my life today," Quentin said quietly, his voice rough from smoke. Madeline, her face streaked with soot, her dress torn and burned at the hem, shook her head. "We saved each other. You could have been killed climbing up that barn wall." She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the distant firelight. "So could you, staying inside it." Quentin reached for her hand, finding it scraped and blistered from hours of firefighting. "Thank you," he said simply, unable to find words adequate to express what he felt. Madeline's fingers tightened around his. "I couldn't bear to lose you," she whispered. "Not when I've only just found you." The words hung between them, raw and honest in a way that only near-death experiences allow. Quentin felt something break loose inside him, a final barrier of grief and guilt crumbling away. Slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, hesitant, a question rather than a demand. Madeline answered by sliding her hand to the back of his neck, drawing him closer, deepening the kiss with a certainty that matched the courage she had shown all day. When they finally separated, Quentin rested his forehead against hers. "I don't want you to go to Boston," he admitted. "I know," she replied softly, "but I need to. Not just for Lewis's wedding, but I need to close that chapter properly before I can fully begin this one." Quentin nodded, understanding. "Then I'll be here waiting when you return. We all will." The next day, Mrs. Wilson brought the twins home, both unharmed and blissfully unaware of how close they had come to losing their home. Word of the fire and of Madeline's heroism had spread through Green River, and a steady stream of neighbors arrived to help with cleanup and to offer assistance rebuilding the barn. "You've got yourself a remarkable woman there," Harold Jenkins commented as he helped Quentin salvage tools from the barn ruins. "Half the town's talking about how she scaled that barn wall like she was part mountain goat." "She's not my woman," Quentin corrected automatically, though the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. Harold gave him a knowing look. Maybe not officially, but anyone with eyes can see which way the wind's blowing, and it's about time if you don't mind my saying so. That evening, after the last of the volunteers had departed, Quentin found Madeline in the nursery, singing softly to the twins as they drifted to sleep. "They're none the worse for their adventure," she whispered as he entered. "Mrs. Wilson said they were perfect angels at the hotel." "They're only angels when they're sleeping," Quentin replied with a smile, coming to stand beside her. "The rest of the time they take after their father," Madeline laughed softly. "So you admit to being less than angelic." "I admit to being stubborn, occasionally short-tempered, and completely out of my depth when it comes to." He paused, gathering his courage. "When it comes to telling a woman how I feel about her." Madeline's breath caught. "And how do you feel?" Quentin took her hand, drawing her away from the cradles to the hallway where they wouldn't disturb the sleeping infants. "I feel like a man who's been given a second chance at happiness, a man who isn't sure he deserves it, but who wants it more than he can say." Tears welled in Madeline's eyes. "Quentin, I know the timing is terrible," he continued. "You're leaving in 2 days, and I know it's fast. We've known each other less than 6 months, but yesterday made me realize that life is too uncertain to waste time being cautious." "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm saying that I've fallen in love with you, Madeline Vaughn, and while you're in Boston, I want you to know that you have a home here with me and the twins if you choose to accept it." A tear slipped down her cheek. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" "Not yet," Quentin said, wiping the tear away with his thumb. "That question deserves a proper setting, not a smoke-damaged hallway while we're both dead on our feet from fighting a fire. But I'm telling you my intentions, so you can think about them while you're away." Madeline smiled through her tears. "My answer won't change with thinking, Quentin. I fell in love with your children first, and then, before I even realized it was happening, with their father." Quentin pulled her into his arms, holding her as though she might disappear if he let go. "Come back to us," he whispered against her hair. "Come back to me. Wild horses couldn't keep me away," she promised. 2 days later, Quentin stood beside the stagecoach in Green River, the twins cradled in each arm as Madeline prepared to depart. The town bustled around them, oblivious to the significance of the moment for the small family. 6 weeks, Madeline said, touching each twin's cheek in turn. "I'll be back before they forget me." "Impossible," Quentin assured her. "They love you too much, and I love them." She looked up at Quentin, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "All of you." The stagecoach driver called for passengers to board. Madeline hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pressed a small object into Quentin's hand. "To remember me by," she said softly. Quentin looked down to find a small daguerreotype in a brass frame. Madeline with the twins, taken in town the previous day. "I couldn't forget you if I tried." "All aboard," the driver called impatiently. With a final kiss for each twin and a lingering one for Quentin, Madeline boarded the stagecoach. As it pulled away, she leaned from the window, waving until the coach turned the bend and disappeared from sight. The days that followed were harder than Quentin had anticipated. Though Mrs. Wilson came daily to help with the twins, the house felt emptier than it had even in the dark days after Elizabeth's death. He found himself looking for Madeline in every room, listening for her voice, missing her presence at the dinner table and on the porch in the evenings. The twins, too, seemed to sense her absence. They were fussier, less easily soothed, as though they were searching for the woman who had become a maternal presence in their lives. Work provided some distraction. With the help of neighbors and his own men, Quentin began rebuilding the barn, a project that consumed his daylight hours and left him physically exhausted enough to sleep at night, despite his restless thoughts. Letters from Madeline arrived, sporadically detailed accounts of her journey east, her reunion with her family, and the wedding preparations. Each one ended with assurances of her return and messages of love for him and the twins. Quentin read each letter multiple times, carrying them in his pocket until the paper became soft and worn at the creases. He wrote back faithfully, describing the twins' developmental milestones, the progress on the barn, the changing season as summer gave way to early autumn. What he didn't write was how deeply he missed her, how the thought of her possibly deciding to stay in Boston haunted his dreams, how he found himself counting the days until her expected return like a man awaiting parole. 4 weeks after Madeline's departure, as September painted the cottonwood leaves gold, Clara arrived for another visit. "You look terrible," she announced upon seeing Quentin. "Are you sleeping at all?" "When the twins allow it," he replied, helping her down from her wagon. "What brings you to Green River?" Clara linked her arm through his as they walked toward the house. "Can't a sister visit her brother and niece and nephew without an interrogation? A normal sister, perhaps. You, I'm suspicious of," she laughed. "Fine, I came to check on you." "Your letters have been positively morose since Madeline left." "I haven't been morose," Quentin protested. "The house is quiet. The twins seem to miss her." "The weather is changing," Clara quoted. "If that's not morose, I don't know what is." Inside, Clara cooed over the twins, exclaiming at how they'd grown in the months since her last visit. After they were settled for their afternoon nap, she cornered Quentin in the kitchen. "Have you asked her yet?" she demanded without preamble. Quentin raised an eyebrow. "Asked who what?" "Don't play dumb with me, Quentin Hadley. Have you asked Madeline to marry you?" Quentin sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Not officially. I told her my intentions before she left. And she said she loves me too, but Clara, it's complicated." "She has a life in Boston, a family." "Excuses," Clara interrupted. "If you love her and she loves you, what's complicated about it?" Quentin leaned against the kitchen counter, crossing his arms. "What if she comes back and realizes this isn't what she wants?" A widower with 2 small children, a remote ranch in Wyoming territory. What if she's just caught up in the romance of it all? Clara's expression softened. "Oh, Quentin, I've seen how she looks at those babies, how she looks at you. That's not infatuation or romanticism. That's love, pure and simple." "You've known her for all of a week combined," Quentin pointed out. "Some things don't need time to be evident," Clara replied. "Besides, she didn't leave because she was uncertain about you. She left to attend her sister's wedding with every intention of returning. Unless Boston reminds her of all she's giving up by staying here." Clara shook her head, exasperation clear in her features. "For a man who can track cattle across miles of open range, you can be remarkably blind. That woman loves you, Quentin. She loves your children, and she'll be back." The conviction in Clara's voice eased some of the anxiety that had been Quentin's constant companion since Madeline's departure. "I hope you're right." "I'm always right," Clara declared. "Now, tell me when she's expected back, so I can help you prepare a proper welcome." In the weeks that followed, Clara's presence brought new energy to the household. She helped complete the barn raising, organized the planting of a fall garden that would provide vegetables well into the winter, and kept the twins entertained with songs and stories. Most importantly, she forced Quentin out of the brooding state he'd fallen into, reminding him of the joy awaiting Madeline's return rather than the fear of her potential absence. October arrived with crisp mornings and golden afternoons. According to Madeline's last letter, she had attended her sister's wedding on September 25th and would be departing Boston on the 28th, with an expected arrival in Green River around October 15th, depending on weather and travel conditions. As the date approached, Quentin found himself growing increasingly restless. The barn was complete, the fall harvest stored, the house cleaned and readied for her return. There was nothing left to do but wait. On October 14th, Quentin rode into town for supplies and to check if the stage-coach schedule had any updates. The station master confirmed that the eastbound stage was expected the following day, barring any delays. "Got someone coming in?" The man asked conversationally as Quentin studied the schedule. "Yes, Miss Vaughn is returning from Boston." The station master's eyebrows rose. "Ah, the lady who's been looking after your little ones. Folks were wondering if she'd come back at all. Boston's a mighty fine city, they say." "She'll be back," Quentin said with more confidence than he felt. Harold Jenkins, emerging from the general store as Quentin passed, called out a greeting. "Heard your Boston ladies due back tomorrow. Got something special planned, have you?" News traveled fast in Green River. "Not particularly," Quentin replied, though the small box burning a hole in his pocket suggested otherwise. Harold grinned knowingly. "Well, Martha and I thought you might appreciate a helping hand. We'd be happy to take the twins for the evening after Miss Vaughn arrives." "Give you two some time to catch up." Quentin felt a flush creeping up his neck. "That's very kind of you, Harold, just being neighborly. Besides, Martha's been pining for baby cuddles since our youngest turned 12. The offer was too thoughtful to refuse, and Quentin found himself agreeing to bring the twins to the Jenkins home the following evening. On the morning of October 15th, Quentin woke before dawn, too nervous to sleep. He dressed with unusual care, selecting his newest shirt and the vest Elizabeth had embroidered for him as a wedding gift. The twins, sensing his excitement, were unusually cooperative, taking their morning feeding without fuss. By mid-morning, the house was in perfect order, a vase of late wildflowers on the table, a pot of stew simmering on the stove for dinner. Clara, who had delayed her departure to witness the reunion, watched Quentin's preparations with amusement. "You look like you're awaiting a royal visit," she teased as he straightened a picture frame for the third time. "I want everything to be perfect," he muttered. "It already is," Clara assured him. "Now stop fussing before you wear a path in the floor." The stagecoach was scheduled to arrive at 2 o'clock. By 1:30, Quentin could stand the waiting no longer. He hitched the wagon, settled the twins with Clara in the back, and drove to town, arriving at the station with nearly 20 minutes to spare. The small platform was nearly empty, just the station master and a young couple waiting for westbound passage. Quentin paced the length of the platform repeatedly, ignoring Clara's amused glances. At 10 minutes past 2, the sound of approaching hoofbeats and creaking wheels made Quentin freeze mid-step. The stagecoach appeared around the bend, dust billowing behind it as it rattled toward the station. As it drew to a stop, Quentin stepped forward, heart pounding. The door opened, and the driver helped down an elderly gentleman, followed by a young man in a business suit. Quentin's heart sank as a third passenger, a middle-aged woman he didn't recognize, descended. And then, finally, a fourth figure appeared in the doorway, Madeline. She looked different somehow, her clothing more fashionable, her hair styled in a way he hadn't seen before. But her smile, as she spotted him waiting, was exactly as he remembered. "Quentin," she called, descending the steps before the driver could assist her. He closed the distance between them in 3 long strides, propriety forgotten as he swept her into his arms. "You came back," he whispered, holding her tightly. "Of course I did," she replied, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "I promised." Behind them, Clara cleared her throat pointedly. "While this is very touching, perhaps we could continue the reunion somewhere less public. The twins are getting restless." Madeline pulled back, her eyes lighting up at the sight of the babies. "Oh, they've grown so much." She hurried to the wagon, reaching in to touch their cheeks, making soft cooing sounds that had the twins gurgling in response. "They missed you," Quentin said, coming up beside her. "We all did." The ride back to the ranch was filled with Madeline's stories of Boston, her sister's wedding, and the long journey back west. Quentin found himself studying her profile as she spoke, reassuring himself that she was really here, really back. As they approached the ranch, Madeline fell silent, her eyes taking in the new barn, the fall garden, the freshly painted fence. "You've been busy," she observed. "Keeping occupied while you were gone," Quentin replied. "I had help," Clara, seated in the back of the wagon with the twins, snorted. He drove everyone half mad with his perfectionism. That barn would have been finished a week sooner if he hadn't insisted on redoing half the roof because the shingles weren't perfectly aligned. Madeline laughed, the sound making Quentin's heart leap. "I'm flattered you went to such trouble." "It wasn't just for you," he said, though they all knew it largely had been. "Winter's coming. We needed the barn secure. At the house, Clara helped Madeline settle in while Quentin tended to the horses. When he returned, he found Clara preparing to depart. "You're not staying?" he asked, surprised. "And be a third wheel to your reunion?" "No, thank you," Clara replied, kissing his cheek. "Besides, I promised James I'd be home by nightfall." After Clara's departure, Quentin and Madeline faced each other across the main room, suddenly shy despite all they had shared before her trip. "I should get the twins ready for their visit with the Jenkins," Quentin said, breaking the silence. Harold and Martha offered to take them for the evening. Madeline's eyebrows rose. "Did they? How convenient." "I can tell them we've changed our minds," Quentin offered quickly. "If you're tired from your journey, no," Madeline interrupted, a smile playing at her lips. "I think it's a wonderful idea. It will give us time to talk." The word talk held a wealth of possibilities. Quentin nodded, trying to ignore the flutter of anticipation in his chest. "I'll get them ready then." An hour later, the twins safely delivered to the Jenkins household. Quentin and Madeline sat down to the dinner he had prepared. The conversation flowed easily between them, as though the weeks apart had been days instead. "Boston was lovely," Madeline said as they finished their meal. "The wedding was beautiful. My sister is happily settled with a good man, and my family was overjoyed to see me." "But," Quentin prompted, sensing there was more. Madeline's eyes met his across the table. "But it wasn't home anymore. The entire time I was there I felt displaced. As though I was visiting a place I used to belong but no longer did." Hope surged in Quentin's chest. "And where is home now, Madeline?" "Here," she said simply. "With you and the twins, if you'll still have me." Quentin reached across the table to take her hand. "I have something to ask you, and I promised myself I wouldn't rush it, that I'd wait for the perfect moment." He took a deep breath. "But I'm realizing that the perfect moment is any moment you're here with me." Rising from his chair, he moved to kneel beside her, drawing the small box from his pocket. Madeline's eyes widened as he opened it, revealing a simple gold ring set with a small emerald. "Madeline Vaughn," he said, his voice steadier than he'd expected, "these past months with you have shown me that life can begin again after loss, that love can find us when we least expect it. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife, a mother to my children, and my partner in whatever life brings us?" Tears spilled down Madeline's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Quentin, I will." He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, just as Clara had assured him it would be when she had helped him select it in town. Then he rose, pulling Madeline to her feet and into his arms. "I love you," he murmured against her hair. "I think I've loved you since the day you calmed my crying daughter with nothing but your voice and your presence." Madeline leaned back to look up at him, her eyes shining. "And I've loved you since you insisted on helping me bake bread in the middle of summer, just to make my work lighter." Their lips met in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, tender at first, then deepening with the certainty of their commitment to each other. Later, as they sat on the porch watching the stars appear in the clear October sky, Madeline rested her head against Quentin's shoulder. "The twins will need a proper mother," she said softly. "Someone to tell them about Elizabeth as they grow." "We'll tell them together," Quentin promised. "About how brave she was, how she loved them from the moment she knew they were coming. And we'll tell them about how you came into our lives just when we needed you most." Madeline smiled, the moonlight catching the tears in her eyes. "A new beginning for all of us." "A new beginning," Quentin agreed, drawing her closer, "but just the first chapter of a very long story." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Green River, the twins cradled in Clara and James's arms as witnesses. The entire town turned out for the celebration that followed, a testament to how quickly Madeline had become a beloved member of the community. As winter settled over Wyoming, the Hadley Ranch became a haven of warmth and love. The twins flourished under Madeline's care, reaching milestones with the confidence of children who knew they were cherished. Quentin found himself smiling more, laughing often, the weight of grief lifting as new memories filled the spaces where sorrow had dwelled on Christmas Eve, as they sat before the fire with the twins sleeping peacefully in their cradles. Madeline turned to Quentin with a secretive smile. "I have a gift for you," she said softly, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "One that won't arrive until summer." Quentin's eyes widened with understanding, joy flooding through him like a river breaking through ice. "A baby, you're certain?" Madeline nodded, her eyes glistening. "Doctor Thompson confirmed it yesterday. The twins will have a little brother or sister in July." Gathering her in his arms, Quentin held her close, overwhelmed by the fullness of his heart. "Thank you," he whispered, "for coming back, for staying, for everything." "Thank you for giving me a home," she replied, her hand finding his. "For trusting me with your children, for loving me." Outside, snow began to fall, soft and silent against the windows. Inside, the fire crackled, casting golden light over the family that had found each other against all odds. In the years that followed, the Hadley ranch prospered. The twins grew strong and curious, joined by 3 more siblings, 2 brothers and a sister who filled the expanded house with laughter and occasional chaos. Quentin and Madeline weathered droughts and blizzards, market fluctuations and political changes, their partnership strengthening with each challenge overcome. They kept Elizabeth's memory alive for the twins, speaking of her with love and respect. A portrait hung in the main room, and on her birthday each year they placed wildflowers beneath it, a tradition the children continued even as they grew into adults. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Quentin took Madeline's hand the same way he had that first evening after her return from Boston. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. "About choosing this life?" Madeline's eyes, still the same shade of sage that had first caught his attention, swept over the scene before them, the thriving ranch, the children's faces alight with joy, the home they had built together. "Not a single one," she replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. "This is exactly where I was meant to be." Quentin pressed a kiss to her temple, gratitude filling his heart. In the darkest moment of his life, when he had thought all hope was lost, Madeline had arrived not to replace what he had lost, but to help him build something new from the ashes of grief. Together, they had created a love story neither could have imagined, a testament to the resilience of the human heart and its endless capacity to begin again.